Welcome to Newsmakers. I'm Andrew Donovan. At its next meeting in a few days, the Onondaga County Legislature will vote on possible changes to the county charter. If passed, each will go on this November's ballot for the voters to approve or reject. Let's take a look. Term limits on the county executive's office is up for consideration. 3 4-year terms that would be. Removing the county executive's power to fill vacated legislator seats, instead giving that responsibility to the legislature itself. And the third proposal, creating an independent commission to redraw district maps in a brand new redistricting process. Joining me to discuss these proposals, led by her, the chair of the Onondaga County Legislature, Nicole Watts. Welcome, Madam Chairwoman.
Thank you very much, Andrew.
You and I go way back about 10 years now, but this is your first time on Newsmakers in your capacity as the chairwoman. You've been in the job for about 6 months. How would you say it's going?
Yes, yeah. You know, I am loving it because we're getting to do some things that are making a real impact on people's lives, both immediately and long term. And there is just something really beautiful about waking up every day and getting to interact with people and say, we are moving the needle.
And you know, you were not elected to any job before this. This is your first elected job, and you rose the ranks within days to be the chairwoman. What's that transition like?
You know, I think the best things in life often are unplanned from you knowing it, but they happen to you, and yet all of life seems to have planned this moment, right? I think that there's so many experiences that I had prior to this that I didn't even know were preparing me for this job and for this moment, and it's been a lot of learning. I often say the leadership pieces are things I've been able to develop over my life, but the actual details are where the learning is. But fortunately, I'm surrounded by a lot of really knowledgeable people who have been great teachers and continue to be, and we learn as we go. And I am grateful for those people surrounding me and instilling those things, and we've been able to kind of build the plane as it's flying in a way that I think is working well.
Well, I was going to ask, just reading the county charter is probably something most people haven't done. Talk about an education in itself. I was going to ask how you're navigating literal legal details. It seems like a lot.
It is a lot, definitely. And I'm, again, very grateful to be surrounded by our clerks. They're brand new as well, but they have just been amazing at being a team with me to really dissect and research questions, as well as our attorneys, to understand what each sentence means and what it really plays out like in real life.
So let's talk about these possible changes to the charter. I think the first thing to mention is that this is up to the voters in November. So if it does pass this coming week in the full legislature's vote, to change the charter, it needs to be approved by voters. So this will appear on the back of their ballot in November.
Correct. So, you know, the charter is essentially the constitution of the county. It is our guiding document. It is our kind of way that the government is structured. And so understandably, when changes are made to it, it's changing the structure, the decision-making kind of protocols, et cetera, of the county government. And so the way that our government is set up is representative. And so that important document, having changes made to it, needs to be weighed in by the people who are voting us into office. And so anytime that we make a change to that important document, it goes to the voters. So we're considering 3 major changes to it this year, and those are all things that are put forward by the legislature in order to get on the ballot, but ultimately at the end of the day, the people decide, and we believe these are decisions the people should be able to be making the final call on. Let's review those. The first would be term limits on the Office of County Executive. Correct. So there's the first one, term limits. So this is a continuation. If folks were paying attention last year, you know, the legislature had term limits that were installed last year on the ballot. It was one of the items that was there in November. For itself. Legislators approved, exactly. And voters approved legislature term limits. So my colleagues in our previous iteration, you know, were the ones who put that on the ballot. So this is a continuation of that. And we're also looking to put the comptroller on as well. So those are the 2 remaining seats that the legislature can move to have a referendum and put on the ballot, the county executive and the county comptroller. Well, let's talk to that point. Why doesn't the county legislature have the power to ask the voters to approve the same for an office like the district attorney or the county clerk? So because those are set by the court systems and the state, they have different kind of governing entities that are oversight powers for them. And so that's why they set those kind of legislation related to that.
And I know it came up when you announced this that you would consider also term limiting the other seat you have power over, which is the comptroller.
Yes.
Where does that possibility stand?
So we're actively considering, I would even say planning on it at this point, just working on the details.
And that would basically match the same that you're doing for the county executive?
Correct, yes.
And I guess some criticism from your Republican caucus colleagues were that they weren't considered together, and perhaps you're going after a Republican seat holder versus the comptroller is currently a Democrat.
Yeah, so there was, some kind of back and forth around how many items really can make it onto the ballot. We want to make sure that the voters can follow these important decisions and be able to make them, and don't want to overfill the ballot. And so we were going back and forth on whether or not, adding yet another item was going to make sense, with every intention always to address it, just a matter of timing. So I think in our discussions, we've come to the conclusion that it's important to people, and so we're going to be considering it.
The power of the legislature to appoint its own vacancies, where did that genesis come from?
So, I think it's the thing that a lot of us don't pay a whole lot of attention to when we're sitting at home, but those vacancies, when they come up, the person that the voters voted for is vacating their seat, right? So now someone else has to step in to represent their voice in the legislative process. And so when that happens, it needs to be as representative as possible of the voters, and coming not only from the district and meeting those legal requirements, but also how are we making sure that that voice is being represented until it can get to the ballot. Some other places have an immediate special election, right? And that the voters just go and vote someone new into that. That's not how we are structured. We are currently structured where the executive fills that vacancy.
And it's happened. I mean,
it happens all the time.
When Chris Ryan was elected to state senate, his seat was filled. And you can go back from there. There are many.
There are many different times. There are several of our colleagues who came into the legislature that way. And so when that gets filled, it's a while. It sometimes can be up to almost a year before it goes to the ballot and the voters get to decide. And in the time that that person is serving, when they've been appointed by the entity that they're supposed to be holding accountable, it's a dynamic that is complex and could not leave the voters necessarily having their voice represented. There's no system that's ever going to be perfect, but we believe that the legislature, who is going to be working with this individual, who's connected to constituents in a more active way, can really weigh in on that process, hopefully in a way that's more representative of the voters who are putting the person in that seat. It's what is advised the National Association of Counties, again, balance of power. This is a kind of a best practice move.
Did anyone consider actually moving forward with a special election system instead?
That's a great question. I think we talked about a number of different things. That would be another level that involves a whole lot more than just we as the legislature have an ability to choose. So this is a step in the right direction. Who knows, down the road, statewide, we would need to have larger conversations about the election practices in order to put that in motion.
The third charter change being considered is basically the process by which the county redistricts, which is a really complicated topic that I feel bad that I can't better explain to my audience every time I have to cover it. But basically, typically, when the census is done every 10 years, districts at all levels of government, federal because of the House, state Senate, state Assembly, but also county legislator districts have to be redrawn so that every district is as close to equal as possible, so that every one representative represents the same number of people.
Correct.
What changes? How do you explain, put in layman's terms, this idea of a commission?
So the commission, this citizen-led, citizen-centered process, is ensuring that the maps that we're drawing are trying to group people that make sense to have a shared representative, right? When you put together two disparate of communities to have a representative, then it's much more challenging for that person to really serve as that district's voice. And a lot of times when this happens, when the redistricting process happens, it's set by a political party. Whoever is in power has power over the maps if it's done by the elected officials and politicians. And so it just naturally is drawn towards you wanting to have districts that are going to lean more in one political direction versus the other, and not always prioritizing that representation piece, but rather that how do we get the most people we agree with in those seats. And since we're supposed to be a representative government, that's one of the most powerful things actually that exists in our whole country around voting rights, around your voice, around representation, is how the maps get drawn is a very, very powerful tool. And so if the votes belong in the hands of the people, let's get that closer to the people as well, so that who they're voting for, from where they come from, who they're representing, is also connected into the people who are ultimately going to vote for those folks.
There was a lot of partisan bickering at the county level about this the last time it happened. It resulted in lawsuits that took a lot of time. But there's so much expert knowledge required to do it, to draw these kinds of maps. Can just a group of independent citizens actually do it with a level of expertise?
So I'm in the city of Syracuse, and city of Syracuse just instituted something like this the last time around with redistricting. And as a city resident in my district, the way that the maps got redrawn, there was not a single counselor that was able to represent my district because none of them lived in the redrawn maps. That would not have happened if the elected officials were the ones who were making those decisions. But as someone who lives in that district, it really does make sense. And the individuals that are able to run for that office, if they're representing that community, our voice is just so very different in the room because of who they're representing. And I think we saw a success story happen through that Syracuse process. It also was filled with a lot of contention, a lot of debate, a lot of challenges. But I think we are witnessing that the redrawing of those districts was a good thing. And so I think we have right here in our own backyard a great example of how it can work.
All right, that was a lot to get through. We'll take our first break. More with the chairwoman when Newsmakers continues. Newsmakers is back. We're talking about possible changes to the Onondaga County Charter. The Legislature Chairwoman Nicole Watts is our guest, a Democrat. But we also want to hear from the Republican leader, Brian May, who I spoke with earlier this week in the Legislature chambers.
A lot of what we heard today, we heard pretty much for the first time. Everything we heard today was for the first time. Some of the arguments are older, but again, seeing them in the form of a local law, that's something we've got to digest. Fact of the matter is, Andrew, Democrats have control of the legislative process now. They have control of the legislative agenda. They can pursue any matter they want, and they can probably preordain any outcome that they want to achieve, given the demographics of the legislature. So, you know, for us, we just have to do our diligence and do our job, and then hope that you know, we're able to catch up. Getting a local law at 5:30 or 5:14 on a Friday before a holiday weekend is tough. Getting 3 of them is nearly impossible, because most of the people that work for the county keep regular hours. And you know, this is today the first moment of, I had some questions last week. It was 4 or 5 days before I even received an email response from colleagues here on the ledge. So we've got a lot to learn and understand about what's being presented.
So the simplest of the 3 is term limits for the county executive.
Right.
It's fairly straightforward.
Fairly straightforward from the looks of it.
How are you going to vote on that?
I don't know. I just took up the resolution today, or local law today. So.
The legislature put its own term limits in place last year.
Right.
You voted in favor of that.
Right.
Is the county executive's office any different?
Probably not. But again, Andrew, knowing that we just really took this up today, I've got a week to decide. And I'm going to use that week to make sure I make a good choice. Yeah.
Have you talked to him? How does he feel about
I
it?
haven't talked to him about it. No.
Does a lot of this feel personal? The Democrats take over, and now they're, you know, every month.
It's not personal. It's local law B power, local law C power, local law D power. It's, again, they have control of the legislative process and the agenda, and power. They're seeking to, you know, empower their control and influence.
All right, that was the Republican leader earlier this week. The Democrat chairwoman is here. What's your response to what you heard from the other side of the aisle?
So we are in new unprecedented territory for all of us in terms of working together and kind of how all this moves forward with the first time in almost 50 years, right? With realities changing. And I'm grateful to have good relationships. I think we have working relationships here as we're doing this together, and we're going to not always agree on everything. So I am grateful that, as Leader May said, we still have time to consider this. So not only as a legislature, we have time to consider before it goes to vote in session, and the Tuesday discussion was just that. It was discussion. It was starting the conversation in earnest together, which is part of the legislative process, but prior to it going to vote, entire week to have those important conversations, to do the due diligence for the job that we've been elected to do, to continue those in session next Tuesday. And then ultimately, the voters have a lot of time to be able to consider these things, because this is all going on the ballot in November, and we're only in May. So we've got quite a few months for folks to be able to interact with all of us to make the best determination that they can as well.
One thing that I can't get past as someone who's covered this legislature for 13 plus years now, what Republicans are accusing Democrats of is what Democrats accuse Republicans of. This kind of last minute things appearing on the legislative agenda, Friday evening, whatever the case may be. Is the whole process broken where that's just the way it, how do we get past that, both parties, for the benefit of the county?
So I just want to celebrate the work of our staff that work so diligently on all these things. The way the sausage gets made behind the scenes has a lot of complexity to it. And so they are working with all different factors. We have to weigh in with attorneys. We have to work with different legislators. You've got 17 legislators, oftentimes multiple, participating in these processes. And so it takes a lot to get to the point where someone just sees an agenda show up on their email or online. And so all of that work, it takes time. And every month there's a whole new set of issues that we're considering. And so is there always opportunity for us to get things a little bit earlier? Absolutely. Are we always trying to build systems to be able to streamline things better and make it happen? Absolutely. The reality is that there's a lot coming at you all the time, including things that constituents are wanting you to pay attention to, things changing on a national front, et cetera. They just impact the ability to consider things in a timely manner. So we're doing the best that we can, and we'll continue to work on doing better.
Do you believe him that that was the first he heard that this law was going to be on the agenda?
I would never doubt the honesty of my colleague.
But I guess, is that fair to him that these legislators in the Ways and Means Committee learned about it late Friday? Should phone calls have been made before and say, hey, this is going to be on the agenda Friday?
I do think that there were a whole lot of factors that went into, maybe communication certainly can always improve. And so I know I've been doing some reflecting and trying to work with some folks on how do we continue to improve communications to make sure that we are working as colleagues to have these conversations as early as we can, but also understanding that sometimes that's just not going to be possible, and how do we all work together in light of that.
All right, we'll take another break. More with the Chairwoman when Newsmakers continues. We're back with Chairwoman Watts of the Onondaga County Legislature. Obviously, there's a lot of work happening beyond just kind of these charter changes. Micron is happening in earnest, and an important priority of your caucus is making sure housing not only is there now, more housing, but as population increases. How is all of that kind of working?
Absolutely. So housing, we're already in a housing crisis. And so there's a lot of challenge in that, but there's a lot of opportunity as well. And we know with Micron coming, the studies and reports and folks doing all the research are saying we need approximately 3,800 new units a year for the next 10 years within our region to be able to both redress the issues we already have and to prepare for the population growth that we're expecting with Micron. So this is something that keeps me up at night, because housing is crucial, right? We're talking about literal roofs over people's heads and making sure that we have enough of it for our people, and the supply and demand issue that then when there isn't enough, pricing goes up, and so it really exasperates a whole lot of, especially the most vulnerable people in our communities. And so it's a top priority of mine and of our entire caucus. We started the Housing and Transportation Citizen Advisory Board to kind of pull together some of the best minds to be able to address this, and are grateful as well to be working with players who are in the Micron world and in some of the other kind of economic development engines to try to work together on redressing the issues issues and planning for the future so we can all seize this opportunity to really be an opportunity for everyone.
People who weren't familiar with you until you were elected should know that you've worked with the immigration system for many, many years as the founder of an organization known as Hope Prints. Just as someone who's an expert in that area and whose social circle is filled with friends of yours who have been new Americans at one point. Now a few of them are probably old Americans because they've been here that long. What do you make of this attack on the immigration culture?
You know, I think when we talk about an immigration, it's so easy to make a straw man, right? You said, these are my friends, these are my people that I get to share meals with, that took care of me when I got COVID. They were delivering meals to my home. These are human beings. They are having babies, they are growing families, they're in our schools, they're running businesses we go to. They're taking care of our elderly in their homes. These are human beings. And the caricature that oftentimes is getting drawn around the people in our community breaks my heart, because it's someone's mother, it's someone's father, and we are not caring for our people right now in a way that makes me proud. And I really would love to see us change that story, in not just in our rhetoric, but in our actions. And so as we are looking at the realities, like the SNAP, most recently in our Health and Human Services Committee meeting, they announced that the HR1 kind of things are coming down, and that a lot of our families, up 50% of them live in my community, are going to be losing SNAP benefits. What that means is profound hunger. It means small businesses closing because customers are not coming out to shop and get their groceries. They're having to go to food pantries that are already overloaded just to be able to put food on the table for their families. So the impact of these things are very, very real. And so I always say, if you don't already know someone impacted by these, come hang out and have dinner with us, because humanizing the challenge that we are facing as a nation, I think, is imperative to finding our way to a solution.
All right, thank you for that. Not enough time for such an important topic, but we'll talk more soon about it. A final word after this. We're out of time. Chairwoman Watts, thank you so much. Really appreciate it. For all the hardworking people of News Channel 9, have a great weekend.
Download the WSYR Plus app on your TV to stream News Channel 9 for free. Just go to your smart TV, search WSYR Plus in the App Store, and download to start streaming today.